The acceptance letter from Columbia University arrived on a Thursday in April, sandwiched between a pizza delivery flyer and my mom's Good Housekeeping magazine. I nearly missed it, almost tossing the entire stack into the recycling bin as I hurried through the front door after track practice. But something made me pause. Maybe the weight of the envelope or the prestigious return address peeking through the bundle. My hands trembled as I pulled it free. This was it. The moment I'd been working toward for the past 4 years. All those late nights studying, the SAT prep courses, the carefully crafted application essays. Columbia had been my dream school since freshman year, when my AP history teacher, Mr. Sanderson, had mentioned his alma mater with such reverence that it sparked something in me. I tore open the envelope and pulled out the letter, my eyes immediately finding the words I'd been hoping for. "We are pleased to offer you admission." "Mom!" I called out, my voice echoing through our suburban home. "Mom! It came! I got in!" The house remained silent. Of course, Thursday was Mom's book club at the library. Dad wouldn't be home from the insurance office until after 6. My sister Ellie was probably at another doctor's appointment. I was alone with my triumph. I reread the letter 3 times, savoring each word, each promise of the future. Then I took a picture and sent it to my best friend, Vanessa. "I got in," I texted. Her response was immediate. "OMG, Alex. That's amazing. Columbia. Told you. Celebration milkshakes tomorrow." I laughed, feeling lighter than I had in months. The pressure of waiting, of wondering if all my hard work would pay off, had finally lifted. I, Alexandra Morgan, was going to Columbia University. The letter also included information about tuition, fees, and financial aid packages. The numbers were staggering, over $80,000 per year for tuition, room, and board and expenses. But I wasn't worried. My parents had started a college fund for me the day I was born. For 18 years, they'd mentioned it in passing. "That's going into your college fund," or "good thing we've been saving for Columbia," whenever I aced a test or won an academic award. I placed the acceptance letter carefully on the kitchen counter where my parents would see it when they got home, propping it against the fruit bowl like a priceless work of art. Then I headed upstairs to shower off the track practice sweat, already planning how I'd decorate my dorm room in Columbia blue and white. By the time I heard my dad's car in the driveway, I'd changed into fresh clothes and was sitting at the kitchen table, pretending to do homework while actually scrolling through Columbia's Instagram account on my phone. The front door opened, and Dad called out his usual, "Hello, family." "In the kitchen," I replied, trying to sound casual despite my racing heart. He appeared in the doorway, still in his work suit but with the tie loosened, standard end of day. "Dad." His eyes found me first, then slid to the letter propped against the fruit bowl. "Is that—" He pointed, eyebrows raised. I nodded, unable to contain my grin any longer. "I got in." For a moment, something flashed across his face. Not quite the unbridled joy I was expecting. It was something more complicated, almost pained. But it disappeared so quickly I thought I might have imagined it, replaced by a broad smile as he crossed the kitchen to wrap me in a hug. "That's my girl," he said, his voice gruff with what I assumed was pride. "Columbia. Just like you wanted." "Just like I wanted," I echoed, pulling back to study his face. "Aren't you excited?" "Of course I am, pumpkin. It's just been a long day at work. The Simpson account is giving me grief." He loosened his tie further. "We should wait for your mom to get home before we celebrate properly." I nodded, feeling a slight unease that I couldn't quite place. Dad seemed off. But before I could dwell on it, the front door opened again, and Mom's voice called out, "Daniel? Alex? I brought home that rotisserie chicken from Costco for dinner." Dad and I exchanged a glance, and something passed between us, a mutual agreement to be enthusiastic for Mom's sake. It was weird, but I brushed it aside as Dad called back, "In the kitchen, Linda, and Alex has some news." Mom appeared moments later, still in her librarian clothes, sensible slacks and a cardigan, with a Costco bag in one hand and her purse in the other. Her eyes, so like my own hazel ones, immediately found the letter. "Is that what I think it is?" she asked, setting down the groceries. I nodded, suddenly shy despite my earlier excitement. "I got into Columbia." Mom's reaction mirrored Dad's, a flash of something that wasn't quite joy before a smile took over her face. "Oh, Alex, congratulations!" She hugged me tightly, but something felt off in her embrace too, a tension that hadn't been there before. When she pulled back, her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "We should celebrate," she said, her voice overly bright. "Maybe we can go out to dinner this weekend, your choice of restaurant." "That would be great," I replied, increasingly confused by my parents' subdued reactions. This was Columbia University, the school they'd been encouraging me to aim for, since I could spell Ivy League. Where was the popping of champagne? The tearful pride? The immediate calls to relatives? "Is everything okay?" I asked, looking between them. "You both seem, I don't know, not as excited as I expected." My parents exchanged a glance that sent a chill down my spine. It was the kind of look they shared when they were deciding how to break bad news. Like, when our dog Rocket died or when Grandpa had his heart attack. "Everything's fine, Pumpkin," Dad said. But his voice had that forced cheerfulness he used when things were decidedly not fine. "It's just been a long day, and this is, well, it's big news. We're processing." "Processing what?" I asked, my unease growing. "I thought you'd be thrilled. It's Columbia. It's what we've been working toward." Mom sighed, setting down her purse with deliberate care. "We are thrilled, Alex. So proud, it's just..." "Just what?" I prompted when she trailed off. Another look between them. Dad nodded slightly, and Mom turned back to me, her expression now serious. "Honey, we need to talk about the financial aspects of this. Columbia is very expensive, and we're not sure we can, well, afford it right now." It was like she'd dumped a bucket of ice water over my celebration. "What do you mean? What about my college fund? You've been saving for this my whole life." The silence that followed was deafening. Dad cleared his throat, looking everywhere but at me. Mom twisted her wedding ring, a nervous habit she'd had, for as long as I could remember. "About that," Dad finally said. "The college fund, it's not exactly what we had hoped it would be at this point." "What does that mean?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "It means," Mom interjected gently, "that we've had some unexpected expenses over the years. Medical bills, home repairs. Life happens, Alex." "But you always said it was separate," I insisted. "You said it was untouchable. For my education." My parents exchanged another of those infuriating looks. "How much is left?" I asked, a cold dread settling in my stomach. Dad sighed heavily. "About $12,000. The room seemed to tilt. 12,000? That wouldn't even cover one semester at Columbia. Not even close. "That's impossible," I said. "You've been saving for 18 years. Where did it all go?" Mom reached for my hand across the table. "Alex, there are other options. State schools, community college for 2 years, then transfer, scholarships, student loans." I pulled my hand away, feeling betrayed. "I don't want other options. I want the option. You promised me my entire life. Columbia, the school you encouraged me to work toward." My voice cracked embarrassingly. "The school I just got into." "We know this is disappointing," Dad began. "Disappointing?" I interrupted, anger flaring. "It's more than disappointing, Dad. It's a broken promise, a massive one." "Alexandra?" Mom said, her librarian voice coming out, the one that brooked no argument. "We understand you're upset, but life isn't always straightforward. Financial situations change. Priorities shift. What priorities? I demanded. What could possibly be more important than the education you've been promising me for 18 years? The moment the words left my mouth, I knew. Of course. The answer was so obvious I felt stupid for even asking. Ellie, I said flatly. You spent my college fund on Ellie. My sister Eleanor was 15, 3 years younger than me, and the center of our family's universe for the past decade. Not because she was spoiled or demanding, but because she was sick. Juvenile idiopathic arthritis, diagnosed when she was 5, followed by a rare autoimmune disorder 2 years later. Our lives had revolved around her medical appointments, treatments, and special diets for as long as I could remember. I loved my sister fiercely. How could I not? She was brave and funny and kind, even on her worst pain days. But in that moment, standing in our kitchen with my Columbia acceptance letter now feeling like a cruel joke, I hated that her illness had once again altered the course of my life. Alex, Dad said warningly, your sister's medical care is non-negotiable. You know that. I know, I said, suddenly deflated. I know it is, but you could have told me. All these years, you let me believe there was a plan, a future waiting for me. You let me work toward Columbia, knowing I could never afford to go. That's not true, Mom insisted. We always hoped things would improve, that the fund would recover, that we'd find a way. Hope isn't a plan, Mom, I said bitterly. And neither is lying to your daughter for 18 years. We never lied, Dad began. Lies of omission are still lies, I cut him off. I'm going to my room. I need to process. I grabbed the Columbia letter and walked out, ignoring their calls to come back and talk more. In my bedroom, I closed the door and sank onto my bed, staring at the acceptance letter that now felt like a beautifully wrapped gift box with nothing inside. My phone buzzed repeatedly. Texts from Vanessa asking about dinner plans, about dorm preferences, about whether I'd registered for the Columbia Admitted Students Weekend next month. I turned it off, unable to face her enthusiasm when my own had been so thoroughly crushed. $12,000. After 18 years of supposed saving. It didn't make sense, even with Ellie's medical expenses. My parents had good health insurance through Dad's job at the insurance company. Sure, there were copays and treatments insurance wouldn't cover, but enough to drain what should have been a substantial college fund? Something wasn't adding up. And as I sat there staring at my Columbia acceptance letter, a resolve formed in my mind. I needed answers, real ones, not the vague explanations my parents had offered. If my college dreams were being sacrificed, I deserved to know exactly why. Little did I know that my search for answers would uncover secrets far more complicated than mismanaged finances. Secrets that would shake the very foundation of everything. I thought I knew about my family. Chapter 2. Paper Trails. The next morning, I left for school early, avoiding the awkward breakfast conversation that would inevitably follow last night's revelation. I texted Mom that I had a study group meeting, which wasn't entirely a lie. I did have AP Calc study group, just not until lunch period. As I drove the familiar route to Westlake High in my used Honda Civic, a sweet 16 gift from my grandparents, I tried to formulate a plan. I needed more information about what had happened to my college fund. The vague, life happened explanation from my parents wasn't going to cut it. Vanessa was waiting by my locker, 2 iced coffees in hand. Her curly hair was pulled back in, a messy bun, and she was practically bouncing with excitement. "Columbia girl," she squealed when she saw me, thrusting one of the coffees in my direction. "I got you your favorite, hazelnut with oat milk. We need to celebrate properly." I forced a smile, taking the coffee. "Thanks, V." She studied my face, her enthusiasm dimming. "Okay, what's wrong? You should be over the moon right now." I glanced around the crowded hallway. "Not here. Let's go to the courtyard." Once we were seated at our usual bench, away from eavesdropping classmates, I told her everything. The acceptance letter, my parents' weird reactions, and the bombshell about the nearly non-existent college fund. $12,000? Vanessa repeated, her eyes wide. That's it? After 18 years? I nodded miserably. Apparently. But your parents always talked about your college fund. I specifically remember your dad mentioning it at your birthday dinner last year. I know. That's what makes this so crazy. They've been talking about this fund my entire life, and now suddenly it's gone. It doesn't make sense. Vanessa took a thoughtful sip of her coffee. What about financial aid? Scholarships? I already applied for every scholarship I could find. Got a few small ones, but nothing that would make a real dent in Columbia tuition. And financial aid? I shrugged. My parents make too much on paper to qualify for need-based aid. Dad's a senior underwriter, and Mom's been at the library for 20 years. We're solidly middle class. What about student loans? I shuddered. The full cost would mean taking out over $200,000 in loans. I'd be paying them off until I'm 50. That sucks, Vanessa said with characteristic bluntness. So what are you going to do? First, I'm going to figure out exactly what happened to that money. Then I'll decide my next move. Vanessa raised an eyebrow. And how exactly are you going to do that? I hadn't fully formed this part of the plan yet, but as I spoke, it crystallized. My dad keeps all the important financial documents in his home office. Bank statements, investment reports, tax returns, everything. I need to look through them. You're going to snoop through your dad's files? Isn't that kind of invasive? Maybe, I admitted. But they've been invasively dishonest with me for years, so I think we're even. Vanessa looked unconvinced. When would you even do this? Your dad works from home half the time. Not on Wednesdays. He's always at the office for the weekly team meeting. Mom has her book club tonight, and Ellie has physical therapy after school with that new specialist in Greenwich. They'll all be gone for at least 2 hours. And what exactly are you hoping to find? A document that says, here's where all of Alex's college money went? I shot her an annoyed look. I don't know. Account statements? Withdrawal records? Something that explains where 18 years of savings disappeared to. The first bell rang, signaling 5 minutes until homeroom. Vanessa stood, gathering her backpack. Well, good luck. With your investigation, Nancy Drew. Let me know what you find out. I will, I promised, rising to join her. And V, thanks for the coffee. And for listening. She bumped my shoulder affectionately. That's what best friends are for, even if I think you're being a little dramatic. Am I, though? I asked, suddenly doubting myself. Is it dramatic to want to know why the future I've been working towards suddenly isn't possible? Vanessa's expression softened. No, that's totally fair. I just meant the whole secret investigation thing, but I get it. I'd want answers, too. We parted ways for homeroom, and I spent the rest of the school day on autopilot, nodding at the right moments in class discussions, taking notes I'd never remember, smiling at congratulations from teachers who'd heard about my Columbia acceptance. Every "I'm so proud of you" and "New York is going to be amazing" felt like a knife twist, but I maintained my facade of excitement. No need to broadcast my family's financial failings to the entire school. After the final bell, I texted Mom that I was staying late to work on a group project, then drove home, timing my arrival for 4:30 p.m., when I knew the house would be empty. Dad's weekly meeting kept him at the office until at least 6. Mom's book club ran from 4 Faust to 6 Gao, and Ellie's therapy session in Greenwich would take up most of the evening. The house felt different, empty, quieter, almost watchful, as if it knew I was up to something. I dropped my backpack by the front door and headed straight for Dad's home office, a converted den at the back of the house. The door was closed, but unlocked, Dad only locked it when he was working on confidential client information. I hesitated with my hand on the doorknob, Vanessa's words echoing in my mind. This was invasive, a violation of my parents' privacy. Maybe I should just confront them directly, demand more specific answers about the college fund. But then I remembered their vague explanations, the way they'd exchanged those knowing looks, the years of encouraging me toward a dream they knew I couldn't reach. My resolve hardened, and I pushed open the door. Dad's office was meticulously organized, columns of file folders in the cabinet beside his desk, color-coded binders on the bookshelf, a laptop sitting closed and centered on the desk blotter. Everything had its place. Dad's insurance work required attention to detail, and it spilled over into every aspect of his life. I went to the file cabinet first, pulling open the drawer labeled Personal Financial. Inside were neatly labeled folders, taxes, mortgage, insurance policies, investment accounts, education savings. Bingo. I pulled out the education savings folder and carried it to Dad's desk, spreading its contents across the blotter. Inside were account statements from Connecticut First Bank for something called a 529 plan, dating back to 2005, the year I was born. The earliest statements showed monthly contributions of $200, not a fortune, but consistent. By the time I was 5, the account had grown to nearly $15,000. Not bad for the first few years of saving. Then the contributions became irregular. Some months showed the usual $200, others nothing at all. By the time I was 10, the monthly contributions had stopped entirely. The account balance hovered around $22,000, a decent amount, but nowhere. Near enough for an Ivy League education, even in 2015 dollars. And then the withdrawals began. In December 2015, when I was 10 and Ellie was 7, there was a withdrawal of $5,000. The memo line simply read, medical expenses. 3 months later, another $3,000 withdrawn. Then $2,500. By the end of 2016, the account held just under $10,000. For the next 5 years, the pattern continued. Occasional small deposits when my parents could manage it, followed by larger withdrawals. Each withdrawal coincided with a major medical event for Ellie. Her first hospitalization for complications from her autoimmune disorder, the experimental treatment in Boston, the wheelchair when she temporarily lost mobility in her legs. I felt a confusing mix of emotions, anger at the broken promise, guilt for being angry when the money had gone to help my sister, frustration that my parents hadn't just been honest with me years ago. But something still didn't add up. Even with all of Ellie's medical expenses, there should have been other resources: insurance, health savings accounts, maybe even help from my grandparents. Draining my college fund should have been a last resort, not the first option. I continued searching through the file cabinet, looking for anything that might explain the financial decisions more clearly. In a folder labeled Insurance Claims, I found thick stacks of medical bills and explanation of benefits forms. Many showed substantial portions covered by insurance, but others had bold red "claim denied" stamps across them. One denial in particular caught my eye: a $47,000 bill for Ellie's treatment at a specialized clinic in Boston, denied because the treatment was considered experimental and not medically necessary, according to the insurance company's guidelines. The irony wasn't lost on me. My father worked for an insurance company that probably denied similar claims for other families, while his own daughter's treatment was being rejected by a competitor. I was so engrossed in my reading that I almost missed the sound of the garage door opening. Panic shot through me as I realized someone had come home early. I quickly gathered the papers, shuffling them back into their folders and returning them to the file cabinet. As I was closing the drawer, my eye caught on another folder I hadn't noticed before, tucked behind the others. The label read simply, Trust, EM, Eleanor Morgan, Ellie. Curiosity overrode my panic. I quickly pulled out the folder and flipped it open. Inside was a document titled, The Eleanor Morgan Special Needs Trust, dated 2017. Attached to it were bank statements from Meridian Trust Bank, showing a balance of, I blinked, sure I was seeing things, just over $340,000. $340,000 in a trust fund for my sister. My mind reeled. How could my parents have set up such a substantial trust for Ellie while letting my college fund dwindle to almost nothing? And where had that kind of money come from? Our family was comfortable, but not casual $340,000 trust fund comfortable. The sound of footsteps in the hallway jolted me back to reality. I quickly took photos of the trust document and the most recent bank statement with my phone, then shoved the folder back into place and closed the drawer. I had just straightened up when the office door opened, revealing my father, briefcase in hand, his expression shifting from surprise to suspicion as he took in my presence in his private space. Alex? What are you doing in here? I scrambled for a plausible explanation. I needed to print something for school. My printer is out of ink. I gestured vaguely toward his printer in the corner, which I hadn't actually touched. Dad's eyes narrowed slightly. He glanced at his desk, taking in the perfectly centered laptop, the aligned pens and notepads. Nothing obviously disturbed, thanks to my hasty cleanup. You know you're supposed to ask before using my office, he said, his tone more weary than angry. Sorry, I mumbled. It was just a quick thing for AP Lit. Won't happen again. I slipped past him, heart hammering in my chest, and retreated to my bedroom before he could question me further. Once safely behind my closed door, I pulled out my phone and examined the photos I'd taken. The trust document was complex legal jargon, but certain phrases jumped out at me. For the sole benefit of Eleanor Morgan, to provide for health, education, maintenance, and support. Irrevocable. And the bank statement clearly showed regular deposits from something called Morgan Family LLC and an account number I didn't recognize. I texted Vanessa. Found something big. Can you talk? Her reply came immediately. At dance class until 7, call then? I texted back a thumbs-up emoji, then sat on my bed, trying to make sense of what I'd discovered. My sister had a trust fund worth over $340,000, while my college fund had been systematically drained to pay for her medical expenses. Why use my money when she had so much of her own? And where had her trust fund come from in the first place? The questions multiplied, each more troubling than the last. By the time my mom called me down for dinner, I'd worked myself into a state of confused indignation. The dinner table was unusually quiet that evening. Dad focused on his pot roast, Mom asked perfunctory questions about school, and Ellie, tired from her therapy session, mostly pushed food around her plate. I answered in monosyllables, my mind still racing with questions I couldn't ask without revealing my snooping. Alex got into Columbia, Mom announced to Ellie, clearly trying to generate some positive conversation. Isn't that wonderful? Ellie looked up, her face brightening. Despite the chronic pain that was her constant companion, my sister rarely complained and found joy in others' successes. That's amazing, Alex. I knew you would. You're the smartest person I know. I managed a smile for her sake. Thanks, Elle. When do you have to decide? She asked, taking a small bite of carrot. Isn't there some kind of deadline? May 1st, I replied. But I'm still weighing my options. Dad's fork paused halfway to his mouth. Options? I thought Columbia was the dream. It was, I said, unable to keep the edge from my voice. But dreams cost money, money that apparently doesn't exist anymore. Mom's smile became fixed. Alex, we discussed this. There are other excellent schools that would be more affordable. Like where? Connecticut State? The community college? I knew I was being unfair. Both were perfectly good schools. but the bitterness I'd been suppressing all day was bubbling to the surface. "There's nothing wrong with state schools," Dad said, his voice taking on that warning tone again. "I went to Connecticut State, and it served me well. You also graduated with like zero debt because college was basically free in the Stone Age," I shot back. "Times have changed." "Alexandra," Mom interjected firmly, "that's enough. We understand you're disappointed, but sarcasm isn't going to solve anything." I stabbed at a piece of pot roast. "Sorry, I'm just trying to understand how we went from 'we've been saving for your education since birth' to 'oops, there's only 12 grand left overnight.'" Ellie's gaze bounced between us, her expression growing concerned. "What's going on? I thought Alex had a college fund." An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. Mom and Dad exchanged one of their looks again. "There have been some financial adjustments over the years," Dad finally said. "Alex's fund isn't quite what we'd hoped it would be." Ellie's face fell. "Is it because of me? Because of all my medical stuff?" "No, sweetie," Mom said quickly. "It's just life. Lots of expenses we didn't anticipate." But Ellie was too perceptive to be placated by vague reassurances. She turned to me, her blue eyes, so like Dad's, filled with distress. "I'm sorry, Alex. I know how much Columbia means to you." "It's not your fault," I said automatically, meaning it despite my frustration. The color drained from both their faces. Dad's mouth opened and closed wordlessly, while Mom gripped the edge of the table so hard her knuckles turned white. "How do you know about that?" Dad finally managed, his voice barely above a whisper. "Does it matter?" I shot back. "What matters is that you've been lying to me. For years." "Alexandra," Mom began, her librarian voice wavering. "This is complicated." "Then uncomplicate it," I demanded. "Explain to me why you've been draining my college fund for Ellie's medical expenses when she has a trust fund specifically designated for her health care." Another of those infuriating silent exchanges passed between my parents. I slapped my hand on the table, startling them both. "Stop doing that. Stop having entire conversations with your eyes and excluding me. I deserve answers." Dad ran a hand through his thinning hair, suddenly looking 10 years older. "You're right. You do deserve answers. But this isn't just about money, Alex. There's much more to it." "Then tell me," I said, forcing my voice to be calmer. "Because right now, all I see is that you've been systematically sacrificing my future to pay for Ellie's care when there was apparently plenty of money available for both of us." Mom's eyes filled with tears. "That's not... We never wanted to sacrifice your future. It's just that the trust fund... It's complicated." "Complicated how?" "It's money set aside for Ellie's care. Medical expenses are clearly covered in the trust document. Why not use that instead of emptying my college fund?" Dad cleared his throat, exchanging another glance with Mom, who gave a small nod. "The money in Ellie's trust fund came from a settlement," he said carefully. "A medical malpractice settlement." This was not what I'd been expecting. "Malpractice? Against who?" "Dr. Werner," Mom supplied. "Ellie's first rheumatologist." I vaguely remembered Dr. Werner, a brisk, silver-haired woman who had treated Ellie when she was first diagnosed with juvenile arthritis. She'd moved away, or retired when Ellie was around 7 or 8. "What happened?" I asked, my anger temporarily displaced by curiosity. Dad sighed heavily. Dr. Werner missed some key symptoms during Ellie's initial treatment. She dismissed certain test results that should have raised red flags. By the time another doctor caught the mistake, Ellie's autoimmune disorder had progressed significantly, causing permanent damage to her joints and immune system. "The settlement was the result of a 3-year legal battle," Mom added. "We signed a non-disclosure agreement as part of it. That's why we've never discussed it, even with you." "But that still doesn't explain why you'd use my college fund instead of the settlement money," I pressed. Dad leaned forward, clasping his hands on the table. The terms of the settlement and the structure of the trust are very specific, Alex. The money can only be used for medical expenses not covered by insurance, and only for treatments directly related to the damage caused by the delayed diagnosis. Most of Ellie's basic care is covered by our insurance, Mom explained. But the specialized treatments, the experimental therapies, the equipment, those fall into gray areas. Some qualify for the trust funds, others don't. And who decides what qualifies? I asked. The trustee, Dad replied. In this case, it's not us. It's a court-appointed administrator from Meridian Trust Bank. We have to submit claims with documentation, and they determine what can be paid from the trust. This was beginning to make more sense, but I still wasn't satisfied. Fine, so not every medical expense qualifies for the trust fund. But $12,000, Dad? That's all that's left of my college fund after 18 years? Mom had the grace to look ashamed. It's not just been Ellie's medical expenses, Alex. There have been other financial challenges you don't know about. Like what? Another look between them. This time, instead of irritating me, it sent a chill down my spine. Whatever they were about to tell me was serious. Your father lost his job in 2013, Mom said quietly. He was unemployed for almost 11 months. I blinked in surprise. What? No, he wasn't. He went to work every day. I remember. Dad couldn't meet my eyes. I pretended to go to work. I'd drop you girls at school, then spend the day at the library or the coffee shop, applying for jobs and going to interviews. I was too ashamed to tell you. I knew, Mom added, but we decided not to worry you girls. You were 8, Ellie. Was 5. You didn't need that burden. But how did we survive financially? I asked, trying to process this revelation. We drained our savings, Dad said bluntly, including a portion of your college fund. We had no choice, Alex. It was that or lose the house. Then, when your father finally found a position at Continental Insurance, it was at a significantly lower salary than his previous job, Mom continued. It took years for him to work his way back up. Meanwhile, Ellie's condition was worsening, and the lawsuit was draining what little resources we had left. The lawyers worked on contingency, but we still had to pay for medical experts, document fees, travel expenses to see specialists who could testify, Dad explained. We took out a second mortgage on the house, maxed out credit cards. And yes, we used more of your college fund. By the time the settlement came through in 2017, we were in serious debt. We used some of the settlement to pay off the most urgent debts, Mom said. That's actually part of why the trust was established, to protect the remaining funds for Ellie's future care. I sat back, trying to absorb all this information. My parents hadn't just been dealing with Ellie's illness, they'd been facing financial catastrophe for years without ever letting on. Why didn't you tell me any of this? I asked, my voice smaller now. We wanted to protect you, Mom said, reaching across the table to touch my hand. We wanted you to focus on school, on your activities, on being a teenager, not on adult problems you couldn't solve. And we truly believed we'd be able to rebuild your college fund, Dad added. We've been trying, Alex. Every bonus, every tax refund, it all went toward your education. But we started so far behind after everything that happened. The $12,000 that's left. That's from the last 3 years of aggressive saving, Mom said. It's not what we wanted for you, but it's the best we could do given the circumstances. I felt conflicted, still hurt by the years of false expectations, but also gaining a new understanding of what my parents had been dealing with behind the scenes. What about now? I asked. Dad, you're back to being a senior underwriter. Mom's been at the library forever. Our finances must be more stable. They are, Dad acknowledged. But we're still catching up. The second mortgage, the remaining credit, card debt from the lawsuit years, the regular expenses of maintaining a household. It all adds up. And Ellie's ongoing care still requires out-of-pocket expenses that don't qualify for the trust, Mom added. The nutritionist, the specialized mattress for her joint pain, the transportation to see specialists. None of that meets the strict criteria established in the settlement. I stared at the kitchen table, tracing a scratch in the wood with my fingernail. Part of me understood their reasons now, but another part still felt betrayed. "You still should have told me," I said finally. Not when I was 8, maybe, but definitely before I set my heart on Columbia, before I spent 4 years working toward a goal that was financially impossible. "You're right," Dad said, surprising me. "We should have been more forthcoming as you got older. We didn't want to burden you with our failures." "Protecting your children isn't a failure," I said automatically. The response surprised me as much as it did them. "But lying to them is a mistake, even lies of omission." "We're sorry, Alex," Mom said, and I could see she meant it. "Truly." I nodded, not quite ready to forgive, but at least beginning to understand. "So what now? Columbia's out of the question, obviously." "Not necessarily," Dad said, straightening up. "We've been exploring options. With your grades and SAT scores, merit scholarships are a real possibility. And Columbia's financial aid? We make too much on paper," I reminded him. "You said so yourself." "Yes, but there are special circumstances we can explain," Mom interjected. "The ongoing medical expenses for Ellie, the debt we're still carrying from those difficult years. Financial aid offices have some discretion in these situations. And we can contribute the $12,000 that remains in your fund," Dad added. "Plus, we could take out a Parent Plus loan for some of the cost." I shook my head. "You're already carrying debt from a decade ago. I don't want you going further into debt for my education." "It's what parents do," Mom said simply. "Besides," Dad added with a hint of his old humor, "we're planning to move in with you after retirement. Consider the Columbia investment our down payment on your future guest room." That startled a laugh out of me, breaking some of the tension in the room. "There's one more option we've been discussing," Mom said hesitantly. "It would require Ellie's input, though." "What kind of option?" "The trust has a provision for Ellie's education," Dad explained. "It's primarily intended for any special educational needs she might have due to her condition, but it could potentially be interpreted more broadly." I frowned. "You mean using Ellie's trust fund for my education? No way. That's her money." "It's a family resource," Mom countered, "and Ellie would be the first to want to share it." "Absolutely not," I said firmly. "I'm not taking money set aside for her care. That's non-negotiable." My parents exchanged another look, but this time I could read it clearly. Pride. "We figured you'd say that," Dad said with a small smile, "but it was worth mentioning." "So, we're back to square one," I sighed. "State school or community college? Or we fight for more financial aid from Columbia," Mom suggested. "It's worth trying, Alex. Your dream school shouldn't be out of reach just because of our past financial struggles." I wasn't convinced it would work, but I nodded anyway. "Okay, we can try." The sound of the front door opening interrupted our conversation. Ellie appeared in the kitchen doorway a moment later, her backpack slung over one shoulder. She'd clearly come straight from school, probably expecting an empty house since Mom and Dad usually worked Friday afternoons. "Hey," she said, looking between us curiously. "What's going on? Family meeting without me?" "Just discussing college options," Mom said smoothly. "How was school?" "Fine," Ellie replied, dropping her backpack and sliding into the chair beside me. "Any progress on the Columbia front?" I glanced at my parents, then back at my sister. "We're exploring some financial aid possibilities." Ellie's face brightened. "That's great. I've been thinking about it too. Actually, I wanted to talk to you all about something." The earnest look on her face made me nervous. "What is it, Elle?" "I know about my trust fund," she said simply. "I've known for a while." My parents looked as shocked as I felt. "How?" Dad asked. Ellie rolled her eyes. I'm 15, not 5. I've been going to doctor's appointments and therapy sessions for years. I hear things. Plus, I found some of the paperwork in Mom's drawer last year when I was looking for the thermometer. Why didn't you say anything? Mom asked. Because you obviously didn't want me to know, Ellie shrugged. But that's not important now. What's important is that I want to help Alex go to Columbia. Absolutely not, I said immediately. That money is for your care, Ellie. It's way more than I'll need, she countered. Dr. Patel says my condition has stabilized. The new medication is working, and the trust has grown to almost $400,000 with investment returns. 400,000? I repeated, looking at my parents for confirmation. Dad nodded reluctantly. The trust administrator has been investing the principal. It's grown significantly over the past few years. See? Ellie said triumphantly. I was doing the math. Columbia would cost about $80,000 a year for 4 years, right? That's $320,000 total. The trust could cover it, and I'd still have plenty left for any medical needs. Ellie, that's incredibly generous, Mom began cautiously. But the trust has specific conditions. The funds are designated for your health care and education. So we get creative with the education part, Ellie insisted. Alex's family. The trust is supposed to provide for my well-being, right? Well, knowing my sister got to attend her, Dream School would definitely contribute to my emotional well-being. I had to laugh at her logic even as I shook my head. Nice try, Elle, but I'm not taking your money. It's not taking if I'm offering, she protested. Besides, you'd do the same for me. You have done the same for me, whether you realized it or not. That caught me off guard. What do you mean? Ellie's expression softened. Alex, I'm not stupid. I know my medical stuff has affected this family in ways beyond just Mom and Dad driving me to appointments. I know money has been tight because of me. I know you've given up things, summer programs, that science camp you wanted to attend, even the school trip to Washington last year. Those weren't a big deal, I said automatically. They were to you, Ellie countered. But you never complained. Not once. You've been my biggest supporter through everything. Now I want to support you. I felt tears pricking at my eyes. Elle, just think about it, she interrupted. We could talk to the trust administrator, see if there's a way to make it work legally. If not, then fine. But we should at least try. I looked at my parents, who seemed as moved by Ellie's offer as I was. Is that even possible? I asked. I don't know, Dad admitted. But we can consult with the attorney who helped establish the trust. If there's a way to use some of the funds for your education without compromising Ellie's future care, maybe it's worth exploring. Only if we're absolutely sure it won't affect what Ellie needs, I insisted. Her health comes first. Always. Has, Mom said with a sad smile. For all of us. Ellie reached over and squeezed my hand. Just promise you'll consider it? Columbia has been your dream forever. I don't want to see you give that up, especially not because of money that's been sitting in an account doing nothing but growing for years. I squeezed back, overwhelmed by her generosity. I'll think about it, but only if we can find a way that doesn't risk your future care. Deal, she grinned. Then changing the subject with typical teenage abruptness. So, what's for dinner? I'm starving. As Mom got up to check the refrigerator and Dad started gathering the papers from the table, I sat there watching my family with new eyes. The secrets they'd kept, the struggles they'd faced, the sacrifices they'd made. All of it painted a more complex picture than I'd realized. I still wished they'd been honest with me sooner. I still felt the sting of having believed in a financial safety net that didn't exist, but I also understood better why they'd made the choices they had. And Ellie's offer, whether it turned out to be legally viable or not, had shown me something important. That our family, despite its flaws and secrets, was built on a foundation of love and sacrifice that went in all directions. My parents had sacrificed for both Ellie and me. I had made smaller sacrifices without even thinking of them as such. And now Ellie was offering a sacrifice of her own. Whatever happened with Columbia, whatever financial solution we eventually found, that knowledge was its own kind of wealth. Part 2. The Revelation. Chapter 4. Paper Trail. The weekend passed in a blur of research and discussion. Mom and Dad, seemingly relieved to have everything in the open at last, bent over backward to provide the information I'd been seeking. Tax returns, bank statements, medical bills, all the financial documentation of the past decade was spread across our dining room table as we tried to piece together a viable path to Columbia. The financial aid deadline is in 2 weeks. Noted, reviewing the university's website for the 100th time. We need to submit the appeal letter by then if we want any chance at additional assistance. Dad nodded, making notes on a legal pad. I'm drafting the letter now, explaining the special circumstances, the medical expenses, the impact of my unemployment period. Don't forget to mention your current debt-to-income ratio, Mom added. That affects our ability to contribute to Alex's education. I scrolled through the Columbia Financial Aid FAQ, looking for any angle we hadn't considered. It says here they expect parents to use all available resources, including home equity and retirement accounts. Dad grimaced. That's problematic. Our home equity is already tied up in the second mortgage, and raiding retirement accounts would incur significant penalties. Not to mention leave you with nothing for your actual retirement, I pointed out. One problem at a time, Mom said pragmatically. Let's focus on the immediate goal. Getting enough aid to make the first year possible. After that, you can apply for departmental scholarships, work-study programs, summer internships. There are always more options once you're actually enrolled. Assuming I can get enrolled at all, I sighed. The more we dug into the numbers, the more daunting the financial gap seemed. We'll make it work, Dad insisted, one way or another. On Monday after school, I had a meeting with Ms. Perez, the college counselor. I'd been avoiding her since receiving my Columbia acceptance, unwilling to admit the financial obstacle to my dream school. But now, with my parents' blessing, I was prepared to discuss the situation openly. Alexandra, congratulations on Columbia! Ms. Perez greeted me warmly as I entered her office. I knew they'd recognize your potential. Thank you, I said, taking a seat across from her desk. But that's actually what I wanted to talk to you about. I'm having financial challenges with Columbia. Ms. Perez's smile faded slightly. Ah, yes, the cost of attendance is substantial. Have you reviewed their financial aid offer? That's just it. Based on my parents' income, we don't qualify for much need-based aid. But there are special circumstances that the FAFSA doesn't capture. I explained the situation, my parents' past financial struggles, the ongoing medical expenses for Ellie, the depletion of my college fund. Ms. Perez listened attentively, occasionally making notes. This is precisely the type of situation where an appeal letter is appropriate, she said when I finished. Columbia, like most selective institutions, has a process for reconsidering financial aid based on special circumstances. We're working on the letter now, I confirmed, but honestly, I'm not sure it will be enough. Even with some additional aid, we'd still be looking at significant loans. Ms. Perez leaned back in her chair, studying me thoughtfully. Have you considered other options? You were accepted to several excellent schools, if I recall. Vassar offered a merit scholarship, didn't they? Yes, about half tuition, I admitted. And UConn offered a full ride through their honors program. Those are outstanding opportunities, Alexandra. I understand the allure of Columbia. Believe me, I do. But starting your adult life with potentially 6 figures of debt is a serious consideration. I nodded, having had the same internal debate repeatedly over the weekend. I know, but Columbia has been the goal for so long. It's hard to let go of that dream. Dreams can evolve, Ms. Perez said gently. Sometimes the path that seems like a compromise turns out to be the one that opens the most doors. She had a point, one that had been nagging at me despite my determination, to find a way to Columbia. Was I being stubborn rather than practical? Was I letting the prestige of an Ivy League education cloud my judgment about what was truly best for my future? I'll think about it, I promised. In the meantime, would you be willing to review our appeal letter before we submit it? Your expertise would be really valuable. Of course, she agreed readily. Bring it by whenever it's ready. And Alexandra? Whatever school you choose, you're going to thrive. Your intellect and work ethic will serve you well anywhere. Her confidence was reassuring, but as I left her office, doubts continued to swirl. Was I being unrealistic about Columbia? Was it time to accept that my dream school might remain just that? A dream? When I arrived home, I found an unfamiliar car in our driveway, a sleek black BMW with tinted windows. Inside, Mom was serving coffee to a professionally dressed woman with silver-streaked black hair and wire-rimmed glasses. Alex, perfect timing, Mom said as I entered the kitchen. This is Ms. Levinson from Meridian Trust Bank. She's the administrator for Ellie's trust. Ms. Levinson rose, extending a hand. Amanda Levinson. Pleased to meet you, Alexandra. Your parents have told me about your Columbia acceptance. Congratulations. I shook her hand, surprised. Thank you. I didn't realize we were having a meeting about the trust today. Your sister called my office on Friday, Ms. Levinson explained, resuming her seat. She was quite persistent about exploring options for using trust funds for your education. My eyes widened. Ellie called you directly? Without telling any of us? She's an impressive young woman, Ms. Levinson said with a small smile. Very articulate about what she wanted to discuss. Since I was going to be in the area today anyway, I thought I'd stop by and speak with your parents in person. I slid into a chair at the table. And? Is it possible? Can the trust funds be used for my education? Ms. Levinson's expression turned more serious. That's what we've been discussing. The terms of the trust are quite specific. Funds are designated for Eleanor's medical care related to her condition, and for her education and support needs as they relate to her disability. So that's a no, I concluded, trying not to feel disappointed. I'd known it was a long shot. Not necessarily, Ms. Levinson countered. There's a provision in the trust that allows for some flexibility in extraordinary circumstances, provided the primary purpose, ensuring Eleanor's long-term care, isn't compromised. Mom leaned forward. Ms. Levinson has been reviewing the trust's financial position. The investments have performed exceptionally well, and the principal has grown substantially. The current balance is approximately $412,000, Ms. Levinson confirmed. Based on projections of Eleanor's medical needs and the coverage provided by your insurance, this is significantly more than what would reasonably be required for her care through adulthood, assuming her condition remains stable. It's been stable for the past year, Mom added. Dr. Patel is very optimistic about the new treatment protocol. Even so, Ms. Levinson continued, I would be extremely cautious about any substantial disbursement from the trust for purposes not explicitly outlined in the governing document. My heart sank. So we're back to square one. Not exactly, Ms. Levinson said. I've been authorized to consider a limited disbursement for educational purposes under certain conditions. The justification would be that funding your education serves Eleanor's best interests by strengthening the family unit that provides her support. How limited are we talking? I asked hesitantly. The trustees might approve a disbursement of up to $50,000 to be paid directly to the educational institution. This would be structured as a one-time payment, not recurring support. $50,000. It wasn't enough to cover Columbia completely, but combined with the $12,000 remaining in my college fund and potential additional financial aid, It might make the difference between possible and impossible. What are the conditions? Mom asked. Ms. Levinson opened her leather portfolio. First, Eleanor would need to formally request the disbursement, explaining why she believes it serves her interests. Second, we would need documentation from her, medical providers confirming that her condition is stable and that the disbursement wouldn't jeopardize funds needed for her future care. Third, there would need to be a clear plan for how the remaining educational costs would be covered without returning to the trust for additional funds. That all sounds reasonable, I said slowly, still processing this unexpected development. There's one more thing, Ms. Levinson added, her expression softening slightly. This isn't a condition, but a strong recommendation from me personally. If this disbursement is approved and you're able to attend Columbia as a result, I would encourage you to consider how you might one day repay the trust. Repay? I repeated. Not legally, of course. Once disbursed, the funds are disbursed. But perhaps a moral commitment to contribute to the trust in the future, once you're established in your career. It would be a way of ensuring that Eleanor's generosity doesn't ultimately diminish the resources available for her own needs. I would do that anyway, I said immediately. If Ellie's trust helps me get through Columbia, I'd absolutely pay it back, with interest. Ms. Levinson smiled. I thought you might say that. It speaks to the strength of your family bonds, which frankly is what makes me willing to even consider this unusual request. After Ms. Levinson left, promising to present the request to the full board of trustees the following week, Mom and I sat at the kitchen table in stunned silence. Did that really just happen? I finally asked. Is there actually a way this could work? Mom shook her head in amazement. All because Ellie took matters into her own hands. That girl continues to surprise me. Where is she anyway? Drama club rehearsal. She's stage managing the spring play. I checked the time. She should be home soon. I can't believe she did this without telling us. I can, Mom said with a rueful smile. She's always been determined when she sets her mind to something, like someone else I know. She gave me a meaningful look. I laughed. I guess stubborn determination runs in the family. Indeed it does, which is why I'm starting to believe we might actually pull this off. When Ellie arrived home 30 minutes later, I was waiting at the door. Hey, she said casually, dropping her backpack. What's up? You look weird. Ms. Levinson was here, I said, watching her face carefully. Ellie froze momentarily, then attempted nonchalance. Oh? What did she want? You know exactly what she wanted, Elle. She told us you called her office. A guilty smile spread across my sister's face. Okay, yes, I called her. I figured the worst she could say was no, right? And adults always take calls more seriously when they come from other adults, so I thought Mom and Dad should be the ones to have the actual conversation with her. You're incredible, you know that? I shook my head in disbelief. She's taking your request to the Board of Trustees. They might approve up to $50,000. Ellie's eyes widened. Seriously? That's amazing. Is it enough? Will it work? With the other financial aid stuff? It might, I said cautiously. If Columbia approves our appeal for additional aid, and with what's left in my college fund, it could work. We'd still need some loans, but they'd be manageable. Yes, Ellie pumped her fist in triumph. Columbia, here comes Alex Morgan. Don't celebrate yet, I warned. The trustees still have to approve it, and Columbia has to grant the additional aid. A lot of pieces need to fall into place. They will, Ellie said with absolute confidence. The universe owes us some good luck after everything else. I laughed at her certainty. Since when are you a believer in cosmic karma? Since always, she replied with a grin. How else do you explain getting a sister as awesome as me? I pulled her into a hug, overwhelmed by gratitude for this incredible, generous, scheming sister of mine. You're pretty awesome, I agreed. And thank you, Elle. Even if this doesn't work out, The fact that you tried, that you were willing to share your trust fund, it means everything. She hugged me back tightly. You've been taking care of me my whole life, Alex. Let me do this one thing for you. For the first time since receiving my Columbia acceptance letter, I allowed myself to fully embrace the possibility that my dream might not be dead after all. There were still hurdles to overcome, still details to work out, but a path forward had emerged where before there had seemed only a dead end. And more importantly, this whole ordeal had revealed something I hadn't fully appreciated before. The strength of my family. Despite the secrets, despite the financial struggles, despite the stress of Ellie's illness, or perhaps because of all these challenges, we had forged bonds that couldn't be broken by hardship. We were the Morgans, and we faced our problems together. As I helped Ellie with her algebra homework that evening, I felt a new sense of peace settling over me. Whatever happened with Columbia, whatever financial solution we ultimately found, I knew now that I was wealthy in the ways that truly mattered. Scratcher Chapter 5, Revelations. The next 2 weeks passed in a flurry of activity. Dad finalized the financial aid appeal letter, which Ms. Perez reviewed and pronounced compelling and well-documented. Mom gathered all the supporting materials, medical, bills, statements from Ellie's doctors, documentation of their current debt obligations. I researched additional scholarship opportunities, applying for anything I qualified for, no matter how small the award might be. Meanwhile, Ellie prepared her formal request to the trust board, working carefully on the wording with a seriousness I rarely saw from my typically carefree sister. "How's this sound?" she asked one evening, handing me a draft of her letter. While the trust was established primarily for my medical needs, I believe that supporting my sister's education at Columbia University serves my best interests by strengthening our family unit, which is essential to my continued well-being. "That's actually really good, Elle," I said, impressed by her formal tone. "Where did you learn to write like this?" She shrugged. "I read a bunch of legal documents online to get the right vibe. Plus, I've been paying attention at all those doctor's appointments over the years. You pick up the lingo." I continued reading. Alexandra has been a constant support throughout my illness, often sacrificing her own opportunities to be present for me. Enabling her to attend her dream school would contribute significantly to my emotional health by alleviating the guilt I feel for how my condition has impacted our family finances. "Is that too manipulative?" Ellie asked anxiously. "I don't want it to sound like I'm playing the sick kid card." "It's not manipulative if it's true," I said gently. "Is that how you really feel? Guilty about the financial impact?" Ellie looked down at her hands. "Sometimes. I know it's not my fault, that I got sick, but I see how hard Mom and Dad work, how stressed they get about money, and I know things would be different if they didn't have all my medical bills to worry about." I pulled her into a side hug. "None of that is on you, Elle, ever. You didn't choose any of this." "Neither did you," she pointed out. "But you're the one who might miss out on Columbia because of it. That doesn't seem fair either." "Life isn't always fair." I echoed my mother's words from that first difficult conversation. "But we make the best of what we're given." "Well, I'm trying to make things a little more fair," Ellie said stubbornly. "So, the letter? Is it okay? Will it help?" "It's perfect," I assured her. "If this doesn't convince them, nothing will." The following Tuesday, Ms. Levinson called to inform us that the trust board would be meeting on Friday to consider Ellie's request. The timing was critical. Columbia's financial aid appeal deadline was the following Monday. "If the board approves the disbursement, I'll provide a formal letter that you can include with your financial aid appeal," Ms. Levinson explained to Mom over speakerphone. "It would confirm the $50,000 commitment, which should strengthen your case for additional institutional aid." "And if they don't approve it?" Mom asked, voicing the fear we all shared. "Then we'll need to explore other options," Ms. Levinson replied diplomatically. but I've presented the case as strongly as I can. Eleanor's letter was particularly persuasive. Friday arrived with excruciating slowness. I went through the motions at school, unable to focus on anything but the trust board meeting happening across town. Vanessa, who had been my rock throughout this entire ordeal, tried her best to distract me. "You're going to wear a hole in the eye floor with all that pacing," she observed during our free period in the library. "The meeting's not until 3 o'clock. Try to think about something else until then." "Like what?" I asked, dropping into the chair beside her. This is literally my entire future hanging in the balance. "Dramatic much?" she teased. "Your entire future doesn't depend on one college, Alex." "I know that rationally," I sighed. "But it feels that way. I've been working toward Columbia for so long, it's hard to imagine a different path." "Then don't," Vanessa said practically. "Keep imagining Columbia until you know for sure it's not happening. But also, maybe consider that some of the best things in life come from unexpected directions." "When did you get so wise?" "Of this is your fault, Elle." And it wasn't. Whatever was going on with our family finances, it wasn't the responsibility of my 15-year-old sister who spent most of her energy just trying to manage her chronic pain. But there was more to this story than my parents were sharing. The trust fund I'd discovered proved that, and I was determined to get to the bottom of it, not just for my sake, but for Ellie's too, because something wasn't right about any of this. After dinner, I retreated to my room again, claiming homework as an excuse. At 7:05, my phone rang. Vanessa, right on schedule. "Okay, Nancy Drew, what did you find?" she asked without preamble. I filled her in on everything: the gradual draining of my college fund, the denied insurance claims, and most significantly, the discovery of Ellie's substantial trust fund. $340,000? Vanessa repeated, incredulous. "Are you sure you read that right?" "I have pictures," I confirmed. "It's definitely $340,000 in a special needs trust established in 2017. "That's weird," Vanessa said slowly. "If Ellie has all that money, why would they need to use your college fund for her medical expenses?" "Exactly," I exclaimed, relieved that she saw the same inconsistency. "And where did that kind of money come from in the first place? We're not rich. My parents drive Honda Civics and clip coupons for groceries." "Maybe they won the lottery and didn't tell you." "I think I would have noticed if my parents suddenly won hundreds of thousands of dollars," I said dryly. "What about relatives? An inheritance, maybe?" I considered this. My grandparents are all still alive, and there aren't any wealthy great-uncles or distant cousins that I know of. "Insurance settlement?" Vanessa suggested. "Like, maybe they sued someone related to Ellie's condition?" That possibility hadn't occurred to me. I guess that's possible. But wouldn't I have known about a lawsuit? Those things take years, right? "Not if they settled out of court," Vanessa pointed out. "My aunt's neighbor got a big settlement from a car accident, and the whole thing was over in like 6 months with a confidentiality agreement." I mulled this over. Maybe. But it still doesn't explain why they'd use my college fund instead of Ellie's trust money for her medical expenses. The trust document specifically says it's for her health, education, maintenance, and support. Maybe there are restrictions, like maybe she can't access it until she's 18 or something. But it's not about her accessing it. It's a special needs trust, so my parents are the trustees. They control the money for her benefit. Vanessa was silent for a moment. "Alex, I know you don't want to hear this, but I think you need to just ask your parents directly. All this detective work is just going to drive you crazy with speculation." I sighed, lying back on my bed. "You're probably right, but I'm worried they'll just give me more vague non-answers like they did yesterday." "Then be specific. Ask them about the trust fund. Ask them why they used your money instead of Ellie's. And admit I was snooping through Dad's office. They'd ground me until graduation." Worth it if you get answers, isn't it? I thought about the dwindled college fund, the Columbia acceptance letter now buried under textbooks on my desk, the years of working toward a dream that had evaporated overnight. Yeah, I said finally. It is. After hanging up with Vanessa, I spent an hour researching special needs trusts online, trying to understand the legal and financial implications of what I'd discovered. What I learned only raised more questions. These trusts were typically established to provide for individuals with disabilities without affecting their eligibility for government benefits like Medicaid or supplemental security income. But Ellie wasn't on government benefits. Her medical care was covered, at least partially, by Dad's private insurance. The trust seemed like overkill for our situation, especially given its size. By midnight, I'd formulated a plan. Tomorrow was Friday, normally a busy day with both parents working late. But Dad had mentioned taking a half day for Ellie's follow-up appointment with her rheumatologist. If I left school after lunch, senior privilege had to be good for something, I could meet them at home and have a conversation with both parents. Present. No more avoidance, no more vague explanations. I needed answers. And tomorrow, one way or another, I was going to get them. Chapter 3. Confrontation. The next day crawled by at an excruciating pace. I couldn't focus on anything, not my AP Lit discussion of The Great Gatsby, not the calculus review for next week's test, not even Vanessa's detailed analysis of why Jake Sullivan had definitely been checking me out in the cafeteria. All I could think about was the confrontation waiting at home. At 12:30, I signed out of school, citing a dentist appointment, and drove home with my stomach in knots. Both my parents' cars were in the driveway when I arrived, Dad's silver Civic and Mom's blue one, bookends of middle-class practicality. I sat in my car for a few minutes, rehearsing what I wanted to say. Direct but not accusatory. Firm but not emotional. I needed answers, not a family shouting match. When I finally entered the house, I found Mom and Dad at the kitchen table with papers spread out between them. Medical documents from the look of it, probably from Ellie's appointment. They both looked up in surprise when I walked in. "Alex?" Mom frowned. "Why aren't you at school?" "I signed out early," I said, dropping my backpack by the door. "We need to talk." The tension in my voice must have been obvious because my parents exchanged one of their looks again, the silent communication that had always made me feel excluded. "Is everything okay?" Dad asked, gathering the papers into a neat stack. "Did something happen at school?" "No," I said, taking a seat across from them. "This is about what we discussed the other night. My college fund. Or rather, the lack of one." Mom sighed. "Alex, I know you're still upset, but we've explained—" "You haven't explained anything," I interrupted. "You gave me vague platitudes about life happening and unexpected expenses. What you haven't given me are actual answers." "Watch your tone," Dad warned, but I could see uncertainty beneath his stern expression. "I want to know about Ellie's trust fund," I said, deciding to cut straight to the chase. "The one worth $340,000. The silence that followed my words was absolute. My mother's face went completely blank, while my father's complexion darkened to a shade somewhere between embarrassment and alarm. The grandfather clock in the corner seemed to tick more loudly in the vacuum of sound, marking the seconds of their stunned silence. "Where did you hear about that?" Mom finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Does it matter?" I countered. "Is it true?" Dad cleared his throat. "Alex, financial matters in this family are complicated." "So it is true," I interrupted, a cold feeling spreading through my chest. "My sister has a trust fund worth over $300,000, but somehow there's nothing for my education." "It's not that simple," Mom said, regaining some of her composure. "That money it's not what you think." Then explain it to me, I challenged. Because right now it seems pretty straightforward. Ellie gets a future, and I get student loans. Dad ran a hand over his face, suddenly looking much older than his 52 years. We never meant for you to find out this way. Find out what? Exactly? That you've been lying to me? We haven't lied, Mom insisted, though her eyes couldn't quite meet mine. We just didn't tell you everything. That's called lying by omission, I said flatly. 3 days ago, you sat in this very room and told me there was no money for my college education, that I'd need to take out loans or consider community college, all while my sister has enough money to pay for an Ivy League education twice over. My parents exchanged another look, this one laden with resignation. Dad nodded slightly, and Mom took a deep breath. The trust fund isn't from us, she began carefully. It's from Ellie's biological grandparents. I stared at her, trying to process her words. What are you talking about? Her biological grandparents? You mean Grandma and Grandpa Peters? No, Dad said softly. Your mother's parents are your grandparents too. Ellie is your half-sister, not your full sister. The room seemed to tilt slightly as I gripped the edge of the table. What? Before I met your father, Mom said, her voice steadier. Now that the secret was emerging, I was married briefly to another man. That marriage ended, but I discovered I was pregnant with Ellie afterward. Her biological father died in an accident before she was born, and his parents, wealthy people who had never approved of me, set up the trust fund for their only grandchild. I struggled to assimilate this revelation. Ellie, my sister who was only 2 years older than me, wasn't actually my full sister. The sister I'd shared a bedroom with for 12 years, fought with over bathroom time, borrowed clothes from, and confided in, had a whole other family history I knew nothing about. So when Dad came along, he… what? Adopted her? I asked, trying to piece together the timeline. Dad nodded. I legally adopted Ellie when she was 3, after your mother and I married. We've raised her as my daughter because that's what she is in every way that matters. Except biologically, I added, unable to keep the edge from my voice. Alex, please try to understand, Mom pleaded. We never wanted to make this distinction between you two. We've always treated you both as our children equally. Except one of us has a massive trust fund and the other doesn't, I pointed out. That doesn't feel very equal. The trust fund isn't from us, Dad repeated emphatically. It's from Ellie's biological grandparents, and it was set up with very specific conditions. We couldn't access that money even if we wanted to. It goes directly to Ellie when she turns 25, or it can be used exclusively for her education before then. My mind was racing, cataloging memories and interactions in this new context. Does Ellie know about her biological father? The trust fund? Another loaded glance between my parents. Yes, Mom admitted. We told her when she was 16. We felt she was old enough to understand. So I'm the only one who didn't know? The betrayal cut deep, opening a wound I hadn't known was possible. Everyone's been keeping this secret from me? For my entire life? We were trying to protect you both, Dad said. We wanted you to grow up as sisters without this complication. Well, that worked out great, didn't it? I said bitterly. Instead, I get to find out that my sister has a golden ticket to her future while I'm scrambling for scholarships and looking at decades of debt. Alex, your education is important to us too, Mom insisted. We've been saving what we could. Which is nothing, apparently, I cut in. You had 18 years to save something, anything for me. What happened to that money? They both shifted uncomfortably. Dad spoke first. There were financial difficulties after the recession. Your mother lost her job. The house needed a new roof. There were medical bills when you broke your arm. And let me guess, I said, feeling a surge of clarity. Ellie's trust fund was sitting there, perfectly secure but untouchable. It wasn't our money to use, Mom said defensively. The trustees would only release funds for Ellie's specific expenses, her braces, her summer programs, her college tuition. So while you were draining whatever savings might have been for my future, Ellie's was protected by legal barriers. You couldn't breach, I summarized. How convenient. That's unfair, Dad said firmly. We've done the best we could for both of you. Have you? I challenged. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've known for years that Ellie would be taken care of while I wouldn't be. Yet you didn't think that merited even a conversation with me until I was staring down college applications with no way to pay for them. My mother's eyes filled with tears. Alex, please. We love you both equally. These circumstances, they're just complicated. Where did you think I heard about the trust fund? I asked suddenly, watching their expressions closely. They looked at each other, confusion evident. We assumed Ellie told you, Dad said. I laughed, a hollow sound without humor. No, Ellie didn't tell me anything. I found out because Mrs. Abernathy at the bank mentioned it to me, thinking I knew. She's known my whole life too, apparently, just like everyone else except me. The shame on their faces confirmed my suspicions. This wasn't a closely guarded secret. It was just a secret from me. Alex, Mom began, reaching across the table toward my hand, which I pulled away. We should have handled this differently. You're right about that. But please believe that we never intended to hurt you. Intentions don't pay tuition, I said flatly. So what now? I'm just supposed to accept that my sister gets a free ride through life while I struggle? That's not fair either, Dad said. Ellie lost her biological father before she was even born. That money comes with its own emotional complications. Complications she's been aware of and processing for 2 years, I pointed out. While I've been living in blissful ignorance, making plans for a future that apparently was never going to be possible. I stood up, no longer able to sit still with the energy of betrayal coursing through me. I need some air. Alex, please, Mom called as I headed for the door. Let's talk this through. I paused, hand on the doorknob. I think 18 years of not talking is enough, don't you? I need time to process the fact that my entire family history is apparently fiction. That's not true, Dad said, rising as well. We're still your family. This doesn't change who we are to each other. I turned back to face them, suddenly exhausted by the weight of truth. Doesn't it? Because it seems to me that who we are includes people who keep life-altering secrets and financial inequities from each other. That's not the family I thought I had. Without waiting for their response, I walked out, letting the door close behind me with a decisive click. The spring evening was cool, the familiar neighborhood streets bathed in the amber glow of sunset. I walked without direction, my mind churning with questions and revelations. Ellie wasn't my full sister. She had a different father, different grandparents, and a trust fund that guaranteed her future security. Meanwhile, I was facing the prospect of crushing student debt or settling for options that wouldn't serve my ambitions. But beyond the financial implications, what stung most was the secrecy. My parents had constructed an elaborate fiction about our family, one that everyone, including my sister, had been privy to except me. For 18 years, I'd believed in a narrative that wasn't true. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a text from Mom. Please come home so we can finish this conversation. We love you. I ignored it and kept walking, eventually finding myself at the small park where Ellie and I had played as children. I sat on a swing, gently pushing myself back and forth as memories flooded back. Ellie teaching me to pump my legs to swing higher, our competitions to see who could jump the farthest from the swing's apex. Had she known even then? When we were small, building sandcastles and skinning our knees together, had she understood that we were only half-siblings? That she had another family, another history, another financial future waiting for her? My phone buzzed again. This time it was Ellie. "Mom says you know about the trust fund. Can we talk?" I stared at the message, unsure how to respond. The sister I'd admired, argued with, and loved my entire life suddenly felt like a stranger. Or maybe I was the stranger, the outsider in my own family, the only one not privy to the central truth of our connection. As the sky darkened and streetlights flickered on, I finally texted back, "Not ready yet. Need time." Her response came quickly. "I understand. When you're ready, I'm here. Love you, always." Those 3 simple words, "love you, always," brought unexpected tears to my eyes. Despite the revelations, despite the secrets, Ellie was still my sister. We'd shared a childhood, a bedroom, countless conversations and conflicts. That bond was real, even if the story surrounding it had been incomplete. With a deep breath, I stood up from the swing and began the walk home. I wasn't ready to forgive, wasn't close to understanding, but I was ready to continue the conversation. Because regardless of trust funds and biological connections, they were still my family, flawed, secretive, but mine. As I approached our house, I could see them through the front window, Mom, Dad, and Ellie, sitting in the living room, clearly waiting for my return. They looked worried, their faces drawn with concern. I paused on the sidewalk, observing them from this new perspective. No longer the perfect family I'd always imagined, but real people with complicated histories and difficult choices. The truth had changed everything, yet in some fundamental way, nothing had changed at all. With a steadying breath, I walked up the path and opened the door, ready to face whatever came next. "I'm back," I announced as I entered the living room. "And I have more questions." The relief on their faces was palpable, but I wasn't here for reconciliation, not yet. I was here for truth, however uncomfortable it might be. "We'll tell you everything," Dad promised as I took a seat across from them. "No more secrets." Ellie, perched on the arm of the sofa, looked at me with red-rimmed eyes. "I wanted to tell you so many times, Alex. They made me promise not to." I nodded, acknowledging her position without fully absolving her. "Start from the beginning," I said to my mother. "I want to know everything about Ellie's father, about the trust fund, about why you kept this from me for so long." Mom took a deep breath, and as she began to speak, I prepared myself for truths that would forever alter my understanding of our family. "His name was Christopher Harrington," she began, her voice soft with memory. "I met him during my first year of law school. As night deepened around our house, the story unfolded. A young marriage between ambitious students, its eventual collapse, the devastating accident that took Christopher's life before Ellie was born, the wealthy Boston family who had never approved of my mother but who ensured their grandchild would be financially secure. The trust fund was their way of maintaining connection without having to actually be involved in Ellie's life," Mom explained. "They set it up with ironclad restrictions: education, housing when she turns 25, major medical expenses. They never sent birthday cards or visited, just quarterly statements from the trust administrators. When your mother and I married," Dad continued, "we decided to give Ellie my last name to make us a unified family. The Harringtons didn't object. They just wanted legal access to her occasionally and assurance that their money would be used as stipulated." "And you never thought I deserved to know any of this?" I asked, still struggling to understand their reasoning. "By the time you were old enough to potentially understand, you and Ellie had such a close relationship," Mom said. "We worried that introducing this distinction between you would create exactly the kind of resentment and hurt you're feeling now. So instead, you let me find out when it was too late to prepare for my own future?" The bitterness crept back into my voice. "How is that better?" "It's not," Ellie interjected, meeting my gaze directly. "They were wrong, Alex. And I was wrong for keeping it from you too." Her admission, free of excuses, diffused some of my anger. "When they told you, How did you feel? Confused, angry, curious about this other family I had never known. She twisted her hands in her lap. And guilty, because I suddenly had this financial advantage that you didn't. It felt unfair, even though it wasn't anyone's fault exactly. Have you met them? The Harringtons? I asked. She nodded. Twice. They're formal, distant, nothing like Dad. She glanced at our father with obvious affection. They're my biological relatives, but they don't feel like family. We should have been honest with both of you from the beginning, Dad acknowledged. We thought we were protecting you, but secrets, they have a way of causing more harm than the truth would have. So what now? I asked, bringing us back to the immediate problem. I still don't have a way to pay for college, and the applications are due in 3 months. Actually, Ellie said hesitantly, I have a suggestion about that. She looked at our parents. I've been thinking about this since you told me about Alex's college fund situation last month. My parents looked as confused as I felt. What? Suggestion? Mom asked. I want to share the trust fund, Ellie stated simply. It's more than enough for both of our educations. Ellie, that's not possible, Dad began. The terms of the trust are very specific. Actually, it is possible, she countered. I looked into it. When I turn 21 next year, I can petition the trustees to modify the disbursement terms for educational expenses. As the sole beneficiary, if I demonstrate that sharing educational funds with my sibling aligns with the educational mission of the trust, there's precedent for approval. I stared at my sister, stunned by both her initiative and her generosity. You've been researching trust law? She smiled slightly. Pre-law major, remember? Besides, it's my future too. I should understand how it works. Ellie, we can't ask you to do that, Mom said, though I could hear the hope in her voice. You're not asking. I'm offering. Ellie's voice was firm. Alex is my sister. Biology and legal documents don't change that. And I don't want my education to come at the cost of hers. But it's your inheritance, I protested, conflicted between desperate need and pride. Your biological grandparents meant it for you. My biological grandparents created the trust out of obligation, not love, Ellie said bluntly. They've never been part of my life in any meaningful way. But you have. We've shared everything for as long as I can remember. Rooms, clothes, secrets. Why would this be any different? Her offer hung in the air between us, a potential solution, but also a test of our relationship under this new reality. I don't know what to say, I admitted finally. Say you'll let me help, Ellie urged. Let me do this one thing to balance the scales that life tipped without asking either of us. I looked at my parents, seeing both hope and uncertainty in their expressions. Is this really possible? Legally? I'm not sure, Dad said honestly. Trust modifications aren't simple, but if Ellie has researched this, it might be worth exploring. We should consult with the trust administrator, Mom added, her legal mind engaging with the problem, and potentially an independent attorney who specializes in trusts. I've already scheduled a meeting with the administrator for next week, Ellie revealed. I was going to tell you after I had more concrete information, but... She gestured at the current situation. The thoughtfulness of her actions pierced through my remaining anger. While I had been obsessing over the unfairness, she had been actively seeking solutions. Why would you do this? I asked softly. It's your future security. Because you're my sister, she said simply. Full, half, adopted, the labels don't matter. We grew up together, we fought over the bathroom together, we stayed up late talking about boys together. That's what matters. For the first time since discovering the truth, I felt something loosen in my chest. Not forgiveness exactly, not yet, but a path toward it. The secrecy still hurt. The lack of financial planning for my future still felt like parental failure, but Ellie's willingness to share what was hers by accident of birth offered a way forward. I don't know if I can accept, I said honestly, but I'm grateful that you would offer. Just consider it, she requested. Come to the meeting with me next week. Let's at least find out if it's possible. I nodded, too emotionally exhausted to make definitive decisions. Okay, I'll go to the meeting. Mom reached across the space between us, tentatively placing her hand on mine. This time, I didn't pull away. We have a lot to make up for in terms of honesty and planning, but we'll figure this out together, as a family. A real family, Dad added, which means dealing with hard truths and mistakes, not pretending they don't exist. I looked at the three people before me. My mother with her complex past, my father who had chosen to be Ellie's dad, my sister who was offering to share her inheritance. The perfect family of my imagination was gone, replaced by something more complicated but perhaps more genuine. I'm still angry, I acknowledged, and hurt. That's not going to disappear overnight. We know, Mom said softly. You have every right to those feelings. But I'm also willing to work through this, I continued, to figure out what our family looks like now, with everything in the open. It wasn't resolution, but it was a beginning. A commitment to facing reality together, however messy and imperfect it might be. As we talked into the night, painful truths gave way to tentative plans. Anger softened to cautious hope, and the foundations of our family began to rebuild on more honest ground. 1 week later, Ellie and I sat side by side in the austere conference room of the Trust Management Company, listening as Mr. Whitmore, the primary administrator, explained the possibilities and limitations of sharing the Trust's educational benefits. It's not impossible, he concluded, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses, but it would require approval from the Trust Committee. The fact that you, Eleanor, will be 21 soon works in your favor, as does the educational purpose aligning with the Trust's stated mission. And the amount? Ellie pressed. Would there be enough for both of us to complete undergraduate degrees without compromising the housing portion at 25? Mr. Whitmore consulted the documents before him. Based on current valuation and projected growth, yes. The trust was established with considerable foresight regarding inflation and educational cost increases. I remained silent, still uncomfortable, with the idea of benefiting from money that had never been intended for me. Ellie, sensing my hesitation, squeezed my hand under the table. What would be the next steps? She asked. You would need to submit a formal petition outlining your reasoning and the specific modifications requested. The committee meets quarterly, with the next meeting in June. Given the timing for fall enrollment, we could potentially expedite review if all documentation is in order. As we left the meeting, armed with forms and requirements, Ellie turned to me in the parking lot. Well, what do you think? I leaned against her car, trying to sort through my conflicting emotions. I think it's possible, which is more than I expected, but I'm still not sure if it's right. What does right even mean in this situation? She challenged gently. None of this is fair or unfair, it just is. Our parents made mistakes. My biological father died. His parents created this trust. These are just facts. Facts that shaped our lives in vastly different ways, I pointed out. Yes, but we get to decide what happens next, she insisted. I'm choosing to share with my sister. The only question is whether you'll let me. Her framing cut through my objections. This wasn't about deserving or entitlement. It was about choice and connection. Ellie was choosing to share her good fortune, just as she had shared her clothes, her secrets, her life with me. If the trust committee approves, I said finally, then yes, I'll accept your help for college, but only as a loan that I'll repay when I can. She rolled her eyes. Always so stubborn. Fine. Consider it a loan with the world's most flexible repayment terms. And I reserve the right to reconsider. If it seems like it might compromise your future in any way, I added firmly. Noted, counselor, she said with a smile. Now can we please get lunch? Trust law makes me hungry. As we drove to our favorite diner, I felt a subtle shift in our relationship. Not a fracture, but an evolution. The secret that had initially threatened to divide us was instead creating a new kind of bond, one based on adult choices rather than childhood circumstances. Over burgers and fries, our conversation drifted to college plans and major choices, the future gradually taking shape around this new understanding of our past. You know, Ellie said, stealing one of my fries, in a weird way, I'm almost glad this all came out now. How so? I asked skeptically. Because carrying this secret has been exhausting. Pretending we're exactly the same when I had this massive advantage. It felt wrong. Now at least we can talk about it openly. I considered this. I'm not glad it happened this way. But I am glad we know the truth now, however messy it is. Messy truth is better than comfortable fiction, she observed, echoing a phrase our father often used. Speaking of messy truths, I ventured, tell me about the Harringtons, your biological grandparents. What are they like? She looked surprised by the question but answered thoughtfully. Formal. Old Boston money, big house in Beacon Hill, the kind of people who have summer as a verb. When I met them, it was like being interviewed rather than meeting family. They asked about my grades, my extracurriculars, my college plans. Nothing personal. Do you look like them? Or him? Your biological father? It felt strange to ask, but I suddenly wanted to understand all the pieces of this puzzle. Ellie pulled out her phone and scrolled through her photos. Mom gave me some pictures after she told me the truth. This is Christopher, my biological father? She passed me the phone, showing a young man with Ellie's same warm brown eyes and dimpled smile. The resemblance was striking. You have his eyes, I said softly. I always wondered where your eyes came from, since Mom and Dad both have blue eyes. Basic genetics should have tipped us off, she agreed with a sad smile. But when you grow up with a story, you don't question the inconsistencies. Do you ever wonder what your life would have been like if he hadn't died? If Mom had stayed married to him instead of meeting Dad? She considered the question carefully. Sometimes. But then I remember I wouldn't have you as my sister, and that version of life immediately seems worse. Her answer, so simple and sincere, dissolved another layer of my lingering resentment. Whatever errors our parents had made, whatever advantages Ellie had through accident of birth, our connection as sisters was real and valued by us both. The subsequent weeks brought a flurry of activity, gathering documentation for the trust modification, completing college applications, and rebuilding family dynamics with our new understanding. My parents, seemingly relieved that the truth was finally out, became almost zealously transparent about family finances and history. Did you know Dad was married before Mom, too? I asked Ellie one evening as we sorted through college brochures spread across our shared bedroom floor. What? No! She exclaimed, looking up in surprise. Very briefly, right after college. He showed me the divorce papers today when I asked about their early relationship. I think he's overcorrecting for all the secrecy. Ellie laughed. Next thing. You know, they'll be sharing their credit scores and tax returns at dinner. Mom already offered, I confirmed with a grin. I told her that level of transparency wasn't necessary. The humor felt good, healing even. The ability to joke about our family's dramatic revelations suggested we were finding our way toward a new normal. In June, exactly 3 months after I'd confronted my parents about Ellie's trust fund, we received the letter from the trust committee. The 4 of us gathered in the living room as Ellie opened the envelope with trembling fingers. Dear Ms. Harrington Chen, she read aloud, using the hyphenated name that appeared on her birth certificate, but that she never used in daily life. After careful consideration of your petition dated April 15th, the Trust Committee has approved the modified disbursement terms for educational expenses as requested. She looked up, her face breaking into a radiant smile. They approved it. Both of us can use the educational funds. The relief that flooded through me was complicated. Gratitude mixed with lingering discomfort at benefiting from this connection. That wasn't truly mine. But seeing the joy on my family's faces, especially Ellie's, I chose to focus on the opportunity rather than its unusual source. There are some conditions, Ellie continued, skimming the document. Annual academic performance reviews, limitation to accredited four-year institutions, maximum disbursement amounts per semester. But essentially, we both have college covered. Mom wiped tears from her eyes. Ellie, what you've done for your sister is what any sister would do, she finished firmly. Besides, Alex would do the same for me if our situations were reversed. She was right, I realized. Had our positions been switched, I wouldn't have hesitated to share whatever advantages I had. That certainty helped me accept her generosity, with grace rather than reluctance. Thank you, I said simply. I promise to make the most of this opportunity. Dad cleared his throat, emotion making his voice rougher than usual. I'm proud of both of you. The maturity you've shown through all of this. It's humbling. We still have work to do as a family, Mom acknowledged. Trust takes time to rebuild. But at least now we're building on truth, I said, echoing Ellie's earlier sentiment. Messy. Truth is better than comfortable fiction. As summer progressed, our plans took shape. Ellie would return to Columbia for her sophomore year, while I accepted admission to Northwestern with a partial merit scholarship that, combined with the trust funds, would cover my expenses. The schools were distant enough to give us independence, but close enough for holiday visits home. The night before Ellie was scheduled to leave for New York, we stayed up late in our bedroom, reminiscing and planning as we had so many times before. I've been thinking, Ellie said, sitting cross-legged on her bed. Maybe over winter break, we could go to Boston together. I looked up from the suitcase I was organizing. To meet the Harringtons? She nodded. They've asked about you. No, once they heard about the trust modification. Really? What did they say? They wanted to know what you were studying, where you were going to school. I think they were surprised by the petition, but not necessarily opposed to it. I considered the possibility of meeting these strangers who were Ellie's biological family, but had no connection to me. Would that be weird? Me coming along? Probably, she admitted with a laugh. But I'd like you there anyway. You're my family. My real family. I want them to see that. The invitation touched me deeply. Then yes, I'd like to go. Though I make no promises about being charming to people who never bothered to be part of your life until you had access to their money. Your protective side is showing, Ellie teased. But I appreciate it. Always have. As we continued packing and planning, I reflected on the journey of the past few months, from the shocking discovery that had shaken my understanding of our family to this new equilibrium we were establishing. The truth had been painful, but it had also created space for greater authenticity in our relationships. Hey, Ellie, I said as we finally turned out the lights well past midnight. Remember when we were kids and we made that blood pact to always be sisters? With the safety pins and the dramatic oaths? How could I forget? Mom was furious about the potential for infection. Well, I was thinking about that recently. At the time, it seemed like a game, mixing our blood to become real sisters. But now I understand we already were real sisters, just not in the way I thought. In the darkness, I heard her shifting to face me from her bed. We've always been real sisters, Alex. Biology is just one kind of connection. What we've built over 18 years, that's the stronger bond. I know that now, I agreed softly. And I'm grateful for it. For you. Even though I have annoyingly perfect hair and steal your clothes without asking, she joked, lightening the moment. Even then, I confirmed with a laugh. though I'm still mad about my blue sweater that mysteriously disappeared last winter. It's in the back of my closet, she confessed. I'll return it tomorrow. As silence settled between us, comfortable and familiar despite all that had changed, I realized that family, like trust funds and futures, wasn't a fixed entity, but something constantly being renegotiated and rebuilt. The truth had altered our understanding, but not our connection. If anything, choosing to be sisters with full awareness of our complicated history made the bond more meaningful, not less. The next morning, as we loaded Ellie's car for her drive to New York, she handed me a small wrapped package. "What's this?" I asked, surprised. "Open it when you get to Northwestern next week," she instructed. "Consider it a good luck charm for your freshman year." I tucked the package into my pocket, then hugged her tightly. "Drive safely. Text when you arrive." "I will. And Alex?" she added as she got into her car. "We're going to be okay. All of us. Different than before, but okay." As I watched her drive away, I believed her. The family I thought I had might have been partially fiction, but the family we were building now was stronger for its honesty, its complexity, and its chosen connections. 1 week later, sitting in my Northwestern dorm room after my parents had left, I finally opened Ellie's package. The schools were distant enough to give us independence, but close enough for holiday visits home. The night before Ellie was scheduled to leave for New York, we stayed up late in our bedroom, reminiscing and planning as we had so many times before. "I've been thinking," Ellie said, sitting cross-legged on her bed. "Maybe over winter break, we could go to Boston together." I looked up from the suitcase I was organizing. "To meet the Harringtons?" She nodded. "They've asked about you. No, once they heard about the trust modification." "Really? What did they say?" "They wanted to know what you were studying, where you were going to school. I think they were surprised by the petition, but not necessarily opposed to it." I considered the possibility of meeting these strangers who were Ellie's biological family, but had no connection to me. Would that be weird? Me coming along? "Probably," she admitted with a laugh. "But I'd like you there anyway. You're my family. My real family. I want them to see that." The invitation touched me deeply. Then yes, I'd like to go. Though I make no promises about being charming to people who never bothered to be part of your life until you had access to their money. "Your protective side is showing," Ellie teased. "But I appreciate it. Always have." As we continued packing and planning, I reflected on the journey of the past few months, from the shocking discovery that had shaken my understanding of our family to this new equilibrium we were establishing. The truth had been painful, but it had also created space for greater authenticity in our relationships. "Hey, Ellie," I said as we finally turned out the lights well past midnight. "Remember when we were kids and we made that blood pact to always be sisters? With the safety pins and the dramatic oaths? How could I forget? Mom was furious about the potential for infection." Well, I was thinking about that recently. At the time, it seemed like a game, mixing our blood to become real sisters. But now I understand we already were real sisters, just not in the way I thought. In the darkness, I heard her shifting to face me from her bed. "We've always been real sisters, Alex. Biology is just one kind of connection. What we've built over 18 years, that's the stronger bond." "I know that now," I agreed softly. "And I'm grateful for it. For you. Even though I have annoyingly perfect hair and steal your clothes without asking," she joked, lightening the moment. "Even then," I confirmed with a laugh. "Though I'm still mad about my blue sweater that mysteriously disappeared last winter. It's in the back of my closet," she confessed. "I'll return it tomorrow." As silence settled between us, comfortable and familiar despite all that had changed, I realized that family, like trust funds and futures, wasn't a fixed entity, but something constantly being renegotiated and rebuilt. The truth had altered our understanding, but not our connection. If anything, choosing to be sisters with full awareness of our complicated history made the bond more meaningful, not less. The next morning, as we loaded Ellie's car for her drive to New York, she handed me a small wrapped package. "What's this?" I asked, surprised. "Open it when you get to Northwestern next week," she instructed. "Consider it a good luck charm for your freshman year." I tucked the package into my pocket, then hugged her tightly. "Drive safely. Text when you arrive." "I will. And Alex?" she added as she got into her car. "We're going to be okay. All of us. Different than before, but okay." As I watched her drive away, I believed her. The family I thought I had might have been partially fiction, but the family we were building now was stronger for its honesty, its complexity, and its chosen connections. 1 week later, sitting in my Northwestern dorm room after my parents had left, I finally opened Ellie's package. Inside was a delicate silver bracelet with 2 intertwined circles and a small card that read, "Sisters by choice, not just by chance. Love always, Ellie." I fastened it around my wrist, a tangible reminder that some bonds transcend biology and secrets, becoming stronger through challenge rather than despite it. Whatever came next, for our education, our family relationships, our understanding of our complex history, we would face it with this hard-won truth between us. The story I'd believed about my family for 18 years had been incomplete. But the story we were writing now, together, had the benefit of being real, with all the complexity, pain, and beauty that reality entails. The transition to college life brought welcome distraction from family drama. Northwestern's campus buzzed with the energy of new beginnings, orientation activities, class selections, roommate negotiations, and the general sensory overload of thousands of students finding their place in a new ecosystem. My roommate, Zoe, was a whirlwind of enthusiasm from Seattle, with purple-streaked hair and an encyclopedic knowledge of indie music bands I'd never heard of. Our tiny shared room gradually transformed into a collage of our disparate personalities. Her, concert posters and twinkle lights contrasting with my minimalist organization systems and framed family photos. "Is that your sister?" Zoe asked one evening, pointing to a picture of Ellie and me from her high school graduation. "You guys look nothing alike." The comment, innocent enough, triggered a momentary discomfort. In the past, I would have glossed over the observation or made a joke about recessive genes. Now, I faced a choice: continue the family fiction or embrace our more complicated truth. "She's my half-sister, actually," I found myself saying. "We have different biological fathers." "Oh, cool," Zoe replied with the casual acceptance of someone for whom blended families were unremarkable. "My stepbrother and I look more alike than my full brother. Genetics are weird." Her easy response was refreshing. Here, away from the history and context of home, I could present my family story however I chose. The revelation felt liberating. Not because I was hiding anything, but because I could integrate this truth into my identity on my own terms. College academics proved both challenging and exhilarating. I'd declared pre-law as my major, inspired partly by my mother's abandoned legal career and partly by watching Ellie navigate the complexities of trust law on my behalf. The idea of using legal frameworks to create fairness where life had distributed advantage unevenly appealed to me in ways I was still discovering. One particular class, a freshman seminar called Justice and Equity in American Institutions. One particular class, a freshman seminar called Justice and Equity in American Institutions, pushed me to consider the broader implications of my personal experience. Professor Ramirez, a formidable woman with steel gray hair and penetrating eyes, had a talent for connecting abstract legal concepts to lived realities. Inheritance law, she explained during one memorable lecture, reflects our deepest cultural assumptions about family, merit, and who deserves what. When we decide who gets what after we're gone, we're making statements about value and connection that outlive us. I shifted uncomfortably in my seat, thinking of the Harrington Trust Fund and its complex impact on my family. Consider how inheritance reinforces or disrupts existing social inequalities, Professor Ramirez continued. Two siblings, raised in the same household, may have dramatically different financial outcomes based solely on biological parentage or legal documentation. Her words felt eerily specific to my situation, though I knew she couldn't possibly be referencing my family. After class, I lingered, drawn to discuss these ideas further. Professor Ramirez? I found today's lecture particularly relevant to my interests. She smiled, gathering her materials. Always nice to hear, Ms. Chen, Alexandra Chen. What aspects particularly resonated with you, Ms.